Welcome to the Sarajevo Film Festival Variety Masterclasses. This is the last in a week-long series of Q&As with international film talent. We're ending with Mads Mikkelsen, whose film The Hunt earned him Best Actor at the Cannes Film Festival. It's being shown again here at the Sarajevo Film Festival. Mads was supposed to have a new film at this year's Cannes, another round with the director of that film, Thomas Vinterberg. And over the course of the next hour, we're going to be having a conversation about his career, his experience, advice for young filmmakers or people interested in being in the industry. And we'll end with Q&A questions from the audience. So please be sure to be sending in your questions all along. We'll be getting those in, and then in the last segment of our conversation, we'll incorporate what you wanted to know. So hopefully the whole conversation will be what you want to know. But Mads, tell us, I was looking at it, it looks like you speak 8 languages, or maybe you can convincingly deliver 8 languages on screen. There's an incredibly impressive clip online of examples of you delivering performances in 8 different languages. Tell me how versatile you really are on that front.
I think that's a product of the IMDb thing, which somebody says something once and it's there forever. Like my father was a cab driver, which he never was. It's still in there.
Okay.
I can get by in a few languages, and then I can pick them up and make pretend. That's what I do for a living. I can't play the piano either, but I've done it in numerous films. So yeah, but I can get by in 4, maybe 5 languages.
Still, that's 3 more than I can manage, but
hey, in Denmark, we're 5 million people. We got to pick something up.
Right. And I guess one of the things that so interests me is there's not a great tradition of Danish actors going on to international success. You can look at Sweden, where you had Greta Garbo, Ingrid Bergman, of course, all of the people who worked with Ingmar Bergman, many still, but in a way, you've been kind of a pioneer for Denmark. Was there really a sense growing up that the career you've had was even possible?
No, not really. When I started out, I just, like any other young, quote unquote, actors, I was 30 when I started, but I just wanted to be part of something. I just wanted to be part of Danish films, theater as well, but predominantly I was in love with film. And I grew up in a period where we had Martin Scorsese, we had Robert De Niro as the guys we were looking at, and Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, and we hadn't done anything remotely like that. And we were in almost 1996 or something. So there was like strong groups coming up from drama schools and film schools that all had the same goal, not to be Martin Scorsese, but to kind of do something to change Danish cinema. And I was fortunate to be part of one of the groups with Nicholas Winding Refn. So that was the first dream, and then it just took off from there. And all of a sudden, I got a phone call from the James Bond film, and I was asked to be part of that world as well. It was never something I strived for, but it was just like many things in my life, a coincidence.
And the moment, I'm jumping forward, but the moment you got the call, I guess, and you play the villain in Casino Royale. This is the thing that sort of changed the path where you suddenly were being considered for English language roles, and it led to series like Hannibal and opportunities in Star Wars movies, Marvel movies. That was really the turning point. Yeah,
it was. I mean, the first one I actually did was called King Arthur, which was a fantastic opportunity to be part of an interesting group of young actors, and that started it to a degree. But obviously, everything changed a lot when I did the Bond film, because there was so much focus on that. But I met a lot of friends on King Arthur. Amongst one of them was Hugh Dancy, who I later did the Hannibal TV show with. Mm-hmm. So it started there, but it was still never a dream. And then I was advised to get an agent over there, and then one step led to another step, and all of a sudden I was part of that world as well. But I always stayed in Denmark.
So there was a real explosion in Danish cinema in the mid-90s. Of course, there was, Dogma 95, the movement that really transformed, I think, cinema at the moment that cameras were getting lighter, digital was becoming possible. It really showed what you could do in that direction. But your path kind of was going parallel to that with Nicholas Winding Refn, and it was almost like he was doing a different kind of, to me, both movements are kind of punk. They're really against the system. And Refn at that time was making the pusher movies, which are kind of almost like a Tarantino type energy or something. Tell me how you sort of fell into that opportunity. And it obviously led to several collaborations together.
Yeah, I did the film while I was still in drama school, and I wasn't allowed to do it. We were not allowed to do anything. So, but I had a summer break, so I just did it anyway. They kicked me out of school for a couple of months, and they took me back again just to make an exam. It all went fine. It was an audition, my very first audition, and he didn't really want actors in his film. He just wanted people who were from the street, literally from the street. And then the casting director advised him that for maybe 2, maybe 3 of the parts, that he should find somebody who could actually be an actor and could go in and out of a character. Yeah. And he considered it, and he looked at several people, and then eventually somebody advised him to look at me. There was this kid in a drama school, and nobody had a clue what I was saying because I was talking like a machine gun. I had this very heavy street language already. Okay. Or still, you might say. I've been in drama school for 4 years at that point. And then, so he watched the tape and he loved it, and he met me and he laughed so hard because he had no clue what I was saying, but he loved the energy. And then we started working.
Yeah, I mean, you really steal that movie, and that was the breakout for you too. I mean, it sort of launched your career. People noticed you in that film, and you worked again with him on the sequel.
We did a film called Bleeder, and then we did
Bleeder is the one I'm forgetting. Yeah.
Sequel, and then we did a Viking film called
Valhalla Rising. Right?
Valhalla Rising, that's what it's called. So yeah, and it was a super interesting journey we've had together. I mean, we went back to the same character literally 10 years after we did the first film, and that was something that we were quite reluctant to go back to a character who was that dumb and that annoying. And see if you can still bring that energy to the table, right? But we worked a lot.
You sort of center that second film on the character, so you go from being, the side to the focus. Yeah, exactly.
And we found a key to the guy that normally the main character always has a certain will. That's something he wants to achieve. That doesn't happen, and so on. But we decided that this guy do not have a will. He does not have a goal. He's just living from day to day. And that was kind of the key to the character, that he was a sidekick in his own life. And that, I think, but I think that made it a very beautiful and heartbreaking story to watch, because you want to hit him at the same time as you want to give him a big hug and say, calm down, compadre. Right?
One of our watchers is asking right now, I'm going to throw it in because it's relevant, whether you would think of working with Nicholas again, whether there have been any conversations along those lines about something else you could do together.
Yeah. We've come to a time in our lives where it's what do you call that? It's kind of a privilege that we only see each other at festivals. Let's put it that way. I always bump into him in a small festival somewhere, on a bigger one there, and we always love to sit down and chit chat and have lots of ideas, and we decide we're going to work again. And then he's off doing something else, and I'm doing something else. So it hasn't happened. I am sure it's going to happen again. There's nothing between us that says it's not going to happen except for time.
I love the idea, though, that, while the Dogma sort of thing was happening at Cannes, and that was capturing the attention and of critics and the community, you guys were kind of the disruptors doing the first Pusher movie. And then later, you find yourselves at Cannes winning prizes. Refn too, is in competition regularly. It
was interesting. We were actually there when we did the second film the year after, called Bleeder, which is a very different kind of film than Pusher. It has the same kind of energy, but it's a completely different story. And we went there, and we were not invited, but somebody told us it was a good place to go and sell your film. Yeah. And we went. We were kind of a little overdressed in the sense that we thought it was kind of winter/autumn in Cannes. We had no idea.
Okay.
But we were standing there sweating and literally handing out DVDs on the street, and it was not a success. Nobody wanted to watch our films. We didn't even have a screening of it. And we looked at each other and we said, you know, we'll be back one day. And so
That's
we did.
great though.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that means that when it happens, you appreciate it. That's also true. You know, you said you started acting in your early 30s. That's later than a lot of people, you know, kind of focus on that. What were you doing beforehand, or what did you imagine your career being?
I never imagined any career, actually. As a kid, I was a gymnast. And from there, I became a dancer, a professional dancer, which was never a dream of mine. It was just something that happened. Somebody wanted some acrobats in a musical in the background. Mm-hmm. And we did a few dancing moves as well. When the choreographer asked me if I wanted to learn the craft, and I had nothing else to do, so I said yes. And then I spent the next 9 years of my life being a professional dancer. And I loved it. I loved every second of it. But I found out that I was a little more in love with the drama of dancing than the aesthetics of dancing. And so it was a natural step for me to try to go that way. So I applied for a drama school, and they took me in. So that was a short list.
So you were supposed to be back at Cannes this year with a film called Another Round, directed by Thomas Vinterberg. There's sort of a running theme throughout the movie, very much in the background, about trying to convince your character to demonstrate his old dance moves.
That's right.
And that pays off at the end. Tell us about what to look for now that we know that you were trained, or that you practiced as a dancer before.
Yeah, well, the theme was obviously it was low-hanging fruit to use that as a theme. We wanted something that we wanted a character that had like come to a certain stop in his life. Nothing was going forward. It was standing still. And so everybody's trying to push him a little from this side and that side. And one of the things, it could have been, let's say, climbing mountains, but since I was a dancer, he decided he wanted to see me dancing. It's not a performance. It's something that is deeper built into the film. It's part of the film. It's not a solo kind of thing, but it's a tribute to life, and hopefully people will enjoy that. Don't look forward for a big performance, just look forward to something that is part of the film. Yeah, but it was interesting because I've never done that in a film, and I always thought that would be very tricky unless you did a musical, right?
Right.
And so it's a very hyper-realistic film. I kept asking Thomas, like, so this is a dream, right? This is kind of a fantasy, right? And he was like, no, he just starts dancing. I was like, geez, how are we going to pull that off, without being pretentious? Watching the film and the way the story evolves, I think it's absolutely the right choice. But I had a hard time seeing it while we were doing it.
Sure. I sort of jumped into that, but tell the audience a little bit about this film, because this is something that will basically be, when access to movies resumes, the thing that they can look forward to seeing you in. And it's a pretty unusual story. It focuses on almost like the relationship between alcohol and human beings.
It's a universal story, but it's also a very Danish story. There is a certain culture in Denmark. Every country has a culture with alcohol. So these are 4 guys who are working as high school teachers, and they all have lives that at a certain point has come to a halt. Mine more than others, maybe, but at one night, one of the guys introduced a theory, which is a Norwegian philosopher who came up with this theory, that we as human beings, we're born with too little alcohol in our blood. We should have 0.5. If that was the case, everything would open up, everything would be much more creative. All the big things that have been done by people who are alcoholics, like Hemingway and Churchill, and then they go into that philosophy and they laugh it off and they go home. But my character is like, why not try it? And then so he does at school, and he thinks that was a great experience, and they discuss it again, and they agree that they should do it as a real experiment, but obviously with one rule: they will only drink while they're working, not home. And so obviously a lot of things go great, and a lot of things go terribly wrong. It's quite a funny film, but it's still a drama. It's also quite heartbreaking.
I wish I could have seen this with an audience, because I feel like the energy of the collective cinema experience, especially when you're discovering a movie at a film festival, would really just enrich the film, because it's playing with this thing that I could see a Hollywood film doing as a comedy, kind of a Will Ferrell, Vince Vaughn kind of
Yeah.
thing. But that's not the tone that you have
No.
collectively kind of gone for here at all, even though they're
No,
funny.
I know exactly. I mean, we had a hunch. I mean, there was some low-hanging fruits. We could have pushed it more. We had a hunch that some of it could be funny in a sweet way or in a recognizable way. But I did see it with quite a few people in the audience the first time I saw it, and I was surprised how much people laughed or reacted or got embarrassed, for what the guys were going through. But that's good. I mean, it's.
These are basically four guys who are teaching high school or school,
Right,
with at least two, drinks in them, if not more, as it goes along, which is a pretty outrageous idea.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they're just trying to improve the way they teach by drinking just a tad, and then of course it becomes a little more than a tad, and you never know. Maybe some of the students are a little nervous. They might need a helping hand as well. So, and it's an interesting film because I think Thomas has done a variety of different genres or styles. He's always had his own tone. His own tone is definitely in this film. But there's a sense of something Italian about this film. And I can't really say different than that. There's a sense of a tribute to life as well in this film.
Yeah.
Unique in the way he's doing it.
What is your relationship to comedy in terms of how comfortable do you feel playing it? I mean, from the very beginning, in Pusher, you're the funniest character. You've made some, I'm thinking of the movie Men in Chicken, which is a very unusual comedy for any actor to have on his resume.
Yeah.
But it's a very special tone, of kind of absurd black comedy. But most of your roles are very dramatic or serious. So would you like to do more comedy?
I don't. Yeah, I mean, obviously, when it's a comedy, but sometimes you will also have characters in a drama that people will laugh at. But it's a cliche to say it, but you have to take comedy very serious. As long as you take your character serious, and you put him in a situation that is absurd, or the character behaves absurdly, it will be funny sometimes. If you go for the laugh, and you do it for other reasons than being honest to the character, it is not my taste of comedy. I mean, unless, of course, we're talking Monty Python. But then again, even Monty Python, they took their characters very seriously when they were standing there hitting each other with chickens, right? I think that's one of the key words to comedy. You take it serious and let the writing and the situation be as absurd as possible, and it will eventually, hopefully, be funny for some people.
Yeah. So did you feel like when you started acting on screen, how much learning did you still have to do? There's such a difference between, say, the performance in Pusher, and very quickly, we're starting to see you mature as an actor. You work with Suzanne Bier in Open Hearts. You work with, Thomas Vinterberg in The Hunt. But it's almost like there's a very quick shift into kind of very dimensional, dramatic characters. And I don't know if that comes through collaboration with the directors or if you were ready for it all along.
It's a hard question to answer because you're obviously in the midst of something, and you can't doubt yourself when you're there. So you go for it. 10 years later, you might look at it and say, yeah, okay, I would have approached that differently today. And 10 years from now, I would do the same. I think it's a constant process. Coming out of drama school, I would say I had to learn everything. And every drama school kid comes out, feels that way. We're always looking like, where are the tools? What am I going to do? I'm all by myself now. Mm-hmm. Then you remember little things, and then you do little things, and all of a sudden you're just working, and by working, you figure things out. But it will constantly change. And the stuff I did when I was 30, I'm not sure I could pull it off today. On the other hand, I wouldn't be able to pull off what I'm doing today when I was 30. So I think it's just a roller coaster. We'll have to see where it goes. You'll pick up some tricks or some comfortable zones down the line where you know if you go that way, something will happen, right? Yeah. But it's also a dangerous thing to go there, because you don't want to repeat it. You don't want to just pull out that drawer all the time. So it's about having some experience and keeping it fresh. I know it sounds as if it's opposite poles, and they are.
Well, let's, because a lot of the audience here, I think, are interested in making films themselves. From the opposite side, if they're working with actors, as an actor yourself, what do you feel you appreciate? What would be helpful to a young director to know in terms of what an actor needs, or what brings out the best in them?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, the way people communicate together is very essential. I mean, for every actor, it's fantastic to have a sense of being able to communicate with your director. Doesn't mean you have to agree on everything. It just means that you somehow have a respectful level of discussing things, or have a respectful level of trying out things, But one of the things I would say to directors and actors is that make it your own. You have to go in there and be the boss of the situation, Start out with smaller budget things. Don't say yes to the big budget film for the first time you do anything. Mm-hmm. Do your thing. Have hands on. Don't let it slip out to 1,000 producers. Not the first time. You can do that later, and then you will be ready. And you need to cooperate with these guys, and that's a necessity for the bigger films. But when you start out, make it your own film. Then you can look at it and say what went right, what went wrong. And the same for an actor. You can't enter the room full of doubt, unless the character is full of doubt, of course. But if you open the door and you go in, take the room. This is your room, this is your couch, whatever. Don't try to please anyone, and see where it lands. And if people don't like it, you have to talk about why.
That's one of the things that's so interesting about that moment when your career began, because what Refn was doing was kind of working with eliminating the obstacles, using what he could, working very inexpensively, a lot of handheld stuff. At the same time, in the little group of filmmakers that comprise the Dogma manifesto, they were kind of forcing themselves to strip away all that stuff. And in both cases, it focused the project on the essential. And to me, that is what redefined international cinema, but it certainly boosted Danish cinema and the voices of these filmmakers in that time. And it's kind of reinforcing what you just said, I think, the idea that when you have the control and the focus and, none of these kind of distractions and these obstacles and interference, you're kind of in that moment getting to maybe the essence of what you're trying to create together. Yeah. And then from that, you can build on bigger things down the road.
Absolutely. I think that's very precise what you're saying. And that's why I say, I'm quite firmly not saying that you should never go into the bigger budget films, because we all have a love affair with those kind of films. But when you start out, you have to find your own way of doing things. And the more you know about that, the more you can give some of that away later on, and knowing why you're doing it. But I remember one of the things that Nicholas, this is not always you do this, Nicholas was dealing with a lot of improvisation, a lot of improv. Meaning that we had a scene 4 pages long, we knew the lines, but he didn't really care about those lines. It was all about the scene, where he wanted the scene to go, what kind of out he wanted, right? And so he would often say, guys, okay, you got the scene, so now make me feel like this. And then he said something, make me feel like this as an audience. Yeah. And that was a little crazy first, because that could be 1,000 things, right? But in certain terms, it could only be one thing, actually. And it narrowed it down to something very focused when we were acting, And I really love that way of directing. You obviously can't do that when you have a Shakespearean script where you have to go through all the lines and just don't forget the lines, But for this kind of project, it was very interesting. It gave us a lot of possibilities, but we somehow landed in the same room when we said that.
When I contrast sort of where you are now as an actor in those early days, I mean, I think of you kind of as a less is more kind of actor now. You're very good at dialing everything down and having it resonate with us in the subtleties. Sometimes it can be like a micro expression, just a little flinch around the eyes or things like that, which that's not, who you were as an actor early on. Is that role to role, or is that really something that's maybe matured or evolved into your style?
I think it's always been there. I think obviously, if you look at the first film I did, which was Pusher One, the character is, he would probably have like 10 diagnoses today if he was a kid in school, right? He can't sit still, ADHD, whatever. Yeah. So obviously it was a little more extreme, but he could also settle down and be very introvert. The next film I did was actually quite opposite. It was very introvert character. And that was very minimalistic, what I did. That was with Mikkelsen as well. And then you go to some of the comedies I've done with Anders Thomas Jensen, and you wouldn't, you would probably not say it's subtle. It's quite insane what we're doing as characters, right? Yeah. But they sometimes land in something subtle, and again, take it serious. Don't just fake being happy or fake being sad. Go for it, even though you look like an idiot and you're crying because of the sauce. That take it as serious, right? So I think it's always been there. I've always been a fan of the opportunity of the camera having close up in a metaphorically way, that the audience can come to you. You don't have to go to the audience, which you do have to do when you're in theater, right? Yeah. You can bring him here. I've always been a fan of that. I've always found that very magnetic when I watch people do that, like Buster Keaton. I've always been looking at him and interpreting his face in 1,000 different ways. Always something happening, but it's very subtle. But I'm also a fan of stuff, exploding, going extreme, if it's for the right reasons. So to answer your questions, I don't know. I think I've always been a fan of that, and then certain films require it more than others.
Yeah, no, I think actually you helped me understand that really is something you're alternating between, and it's really project to project, performance to performance determined. But I'd like to talk about your work with Suzanne Bier, because I feel like she really gets a lot out of actors, and two of your best performances are in projects with her. The film After the Wedding in particular, there's so many layers that come out of what you're talking about sort of trusting the audience to project their interpretation onto what your character is dealing with unspoken. But talk about just sort of building performances with her and what you might have added to your toolkit, through those collaborations.
Well, she's an interesting woman in the sense that if you divide the world up into male films and female films, you would have a hard time placing her specifically, because she has privately a very masculine energy and understanding of the world. And then again, she has maybe a feminine touch that a man wouldn't have. I'll never consider her a man or a woman. I've just worked with her, and I think she's a great director. And she had this very strong co-work with Anders Thomas Jensen, who's doing his own crazy dark comedies.
And they would co-write a lot of those films.
Yeah, they would. Yeah, and both of the films I've done together, and she's obviously the director. And she's not focusing on one character. There's always kind of an ensemble feel to her films. It's always like, there might be one, maybe two we follow more than others, but it's sort of an ensemble film. It means that you don't get 90% screen time and the rest of the guys get 10. You get little, here and there. But it all has to fit into a puzzle. And the more we sit and talk about it, and the more we read the script together, the more we understand where we fit in. And the more we can allow ourselves to feel as if we're the main story, meaning that we will, as a main character, often the film works for you. As a supporting character, you have to work for the film. You have to produce something so people understand where the film goes. When you're the main character, the film is producing stuff so you can actually somehow, this is a very sharp way of saying it, but you can lean back a little more and be a little more subtle. And don't have to produce it, because there are more scenes. It will come. It will. The more they stay with me, the more they will understand what's going on inside of me, right? So, but you can't always do that when you have 4 or 5 characters. But in her films, you can. It's interesting because you feel as if you're a part of the puzzle, but it's still about you, and the story will come and catch it somehow. Is this confusing?
No, I mean, I think that's actually really helpful to understand. And right. I'm going to make a confession, but as a film critic, I feel like the thing I understand least is acting. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's very hard to write about. It's very hard to analyze. And I think it all comes down for me as to whether or not it resonates with you. It's not about technique. It's just like, you know, do you believe it? It's not always needing to be plausible, sometimes comedies or whatever. But what you're saying is helping me understand kind of the job, the work, you know, and the luxury of a leading performer to give you all these other kind of facets that, you know, some of the greatest actors are character actors, supporting actors, and they have a very hard job to do within the kind of, you know, narrow task that they get.
They have to put the film in a certain direction, and often with a tremendous amount of energy or insanity or something. And so it takes a certain skill to be able to come in there and produce that and serve the film like that. And then sometimes you're outstanding, and sometimes people will say, that was a little too much. But then when you look at it again, it wasn't too much. That was exactly what we needed for the film. You know, it's but acting is difficult. It's what you say. It is a matter of taste. Does it resonate? And people often talk about method acting as opposed to the other thing. And very few journalists, critics know what method acting is, and very few actors do. They always believe it's like, oh, I have to live on a mountain for 3 years now and isolate myself. That's got nothing to do with method acting, which is a boring.
Well, there was a lot of confusion about this a couple weeks ago when Shia LaBeouf revealed that he had gotten his whole chest tattooed for something. And it's like, that's not method acting. That's a form of commitment, but it's not the same thing as, you know, kind of tapping into the emotional.
Exactly. You can call it preparation or commitment. You can take it too far, or maybe it is okay to go that far. I don't want to go in that discussion. But method acting is a fairly boring technique about, can you drink this glass of water and reproduce an emotion every single time? The same emotion. It's a repetitive thing. And people always think it's like, oh, it's De Niro, he gains 30 pounds. That's not method acting. That's just preparation or dedication, right? And the same when people say, well, that's overacting. But I mean, there's no such thing as overacting. You can act as big as you want, as it works. If it works, it can be and if you believe it, it can be as big as you want. You can also overact if you're not doing anything. It can be, if you miss the point, it's just wrong. Whether it's overacting or underacting, you know. There is no such thing as acting it too big. And we all know actors who has a certain way, maybe even a grotesque way of doing things. And they're the only ones who can pull it off, but we believe it, you know, and that's not right. It's big, it's crazy big, but I believe it, you know. So there are some terminologies there that is like, it's a little blurry for even us and for journalists, right?
Well, and it's one of those things that I think has been diluted and confused, so that, like, you know, the way this kind of description is used now seems to have changed according to the misunderstanding. The way that, say, the auteur theory. I mean, we could get into some of these things, but
I mean, you could be a fantastic actor who uses method acting, and you can be a so good actor who uses method acting. It's not a label of being good. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
But if it resonates with you, if it's something that brings up an emotion in you, that's an actor you would like, and that varies for every single person in the world.
Related to what you're saying, I'm interested in how it works just in terms of, because the performance is a collaboration with the director, with the cameraman, with, you know, the editor, you know, and those things impact. But you had mentioned something earlier about the difference between stage and screen acting. And I'm also interested just in, when you're doing a screen performance, you know, even how distant the camera is from you and how conscious you are of how you're going to be read in close-up versus your full body as part of your instrument. I mean, do you really, do you just give the performance and hope that the director and cinematographer will capture that? Or are you really adjusting for the close-up in a nuance or something along those lines?
I give it, and I hope they will catch it. And on the other hand, I'm also aware. It's a fine balance, right? We always say, we have to forget the camera. Forget it. Just be. And at the same time, you are aware what it is. So it's like it's a multitasking thing. You're forgetting it, but you also know that it's coming around. It's coming around, and if it's coming around and your character do not want to be seen, you might even move away from it. You know, and that can be interesting as well. If instead of as opposed to see me now, camera, right? So
Yeah.
it's a most actors are aware of where it is and try to forget it. And if you're too aware of it, it goes wrong. And if you completely forget it, it also goes wrong because you will end on the street and the camera is still up in the room. You know, we have to work together somehow. But when everything goes right, you do tend to forget it. You do tend to forget it's there. If the scene really works, you kind of wake up out of a dream and you realize, oh, the camera has moved. I didn't even see it, and that's a good sign.
I mean, that question kind of relates to the period of Danish cinema that you were really coming up with, which is, you know, suddenly we have handheld cameras, we have a lot less of the, it's, you know, the industry's changed too, but a lot less of the kind of interference from lighting and things like that. And if you compare it to your work on Hannibal or on the James Bond film, where there's a specific composition you're playing to, but in a way, actors in Danish cinema kind of had to be able to give a performance that could be read no matter where you can't reproduce that camera movement from one take to the next, you know.
No.
How does that change you as an actor in terms of, say, playing to a specific composition versus a dynamic cameraman? It's a little bit what you just answered. But,
no, but I started out with the rock and roll camera. And that's what I did the first few years, right? Everything was rock and roll. I mean, we would even come into a car, the cameraman would come into the car, and I would lift my feet out of the window so he's sitting there. And then we would walk the car together, and everybody went, how did you do that? So in many ways, it was all about forgetting it. It was always with us. But as I just mentioned there, on a different level, it was also a much bigger ballet than it is when you're doing the bigger scale films, because I really had to work together with the cameraman for him to be able to squeeze in between the seat and the engine, right? Before, and still keep acting and shooting me, right? So in many ways, we were even more aware that he was there, but it was just a different kind of ballet.
Would you explain that anecdote? Because I'm not familiar with it. So there's shots in Pusher where, say, the camera's in the car with you. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, we have a famous scene where we have a scene in a flat. There's a deal going down, and the deal is over. We were shooting on digital, obviously. You can go on forever. And the scene wraps up, and we walk down the stairs, and we have dialogue. The camera follows us. We go into the car, and I open the door, and somehow the camera goes into the car, and I just sit in there. He keeps shooting us, like back and forth on us. And then we stop, go out, and the camera comes out with us again, which is like, how did we do that, right? So in many ways, sometimes we've forgotten completely. Other times we had a deal. If you do this, I do this, you can come around, you know. So that we were even more aware of him in those kind of situations than we would be in a bigger scale film. So it was just a rock and roll kind of way to do it, right?
I love that description. Like decades before Lubeski and, you know, and Cuarón are kind of like winning Oscars and stuff.
This was all out of necessity, right? We didn't have any money, and we didn't have money to buy a dolly. I remember the first time we could afford a Steadicam in the second film. On the very first day, it broke down and I'm completely smashed on the floor. So we forgot about the Steadicams. He just kept going on roller skates on the shoulder. You know? So there was a lot of inventive ways of doing it. And sometimes we forgot he was there, and sometimes we were a very big part of making this work, right? If you go to Hannibal, it's a little the same. Obviously, you have two men in two chairs, and you do some lighting, and much more lighting than we did on Pusher. We didn't do any. That was just whatever was there. And I don't mind that either, because it's a different way of telling a story. It's two different flavors. It works for certain things to have the handheld. It doesn't work for everything. And vice versa. It doesn't work for everything to have a Steadicam. So, of course, it wasn't a big shock when I did the other thing, Kim coming from the rock and roll thing. It wasn't a big shock, but once in a while I could tell I was a little frustrated that we spend that much time hitting a mark because of a light. It was just like, listen, working, come on guys, shoot us. I mean, I can't walk around looking down, hitting my mark, come on. So I get used to that, but that worked eventually.
Now, one thing I'm always curious about with actors is just how when you bring together a team of different performers who've all had different kinds of training, who have different needs, some want to be psychological, some don't want to think about that at all. Some can hit a mark and it can be very precise and take after take is the same. Some, like Christopher Walken, every take is going to be different. How does that chemistry work when you're, kind of bringing together different actors on set? And how do you work as an actor to adapt to everybody's kind of different energy or technique?
I think I'm quite adaptable. I think that I change my way of working quite a bit depending on what kind of film, what kind of scene, and how social I am. Sometimes I'm not at all, depending on the quality of the scene, and sometimes I'm just by myself completely. It depends a lot. So if people, obviously it can be a very, very challenging thing if people never can kind of reproduce what we did. If you have a classical setup of, I'll shoot your side, I'll do that 5 times and then we turn the camera, and it somehow has to match to a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
So if that person keeps changing, it will never be a match. Right? So that can be very tricky. And then sometimes you just have to go with it and say, okay, they'll edit it into something because what that person does is highly interesting, and it might be much more interesting than what we had planned, right? So sometimes sometimes you have to say, come on, pull yourself together, just do it once,
Right. Yeah.
It works like that as well, right? But I mean, crazy things can happen. If you have the rock and roll camera, it's much easier that you don't do the same every time, because it will never be the same with the camera anyway. So now you feel free to edit the way you will. But if you have like your side, my side kind of story, it's much more tricky to edit it if it keeps changing on one side. But no, I mean, you figure out, some people want to be left alone, some would like to be chit-chatty, and so you figure out how that works. Yeah.
And for you, how is it? I see coming in are a lot of questions about The Hunt and about Hannibal, and I'll make sure to get to those questions in those films. But The Hunt is a good one to focus on because people, really discovered you from that film if they didn't already know you internationally. The acclaim it received. But it's also just such a complex role. I think, that and After the Wedding both are these kind of really rich performances. But I'm interested with that one, and I see kind of questions coming in about like how you prepare for that kind of performance in The Hunt, where there's the character seems to be assuming a lot, but the actor doesn't have to do that. But you have to get yourself to a place where you can convince us that you're that person, that you're going through it. Is it psychological? Is it questions with the director? Is it imagination?
I think that it wasn't difficult to put yourself in the shoes of being, dropped into a world where everybody hates you and you haven't done anything. You haven't done anything. You're innocent. And then all of a sudden, everywhere you turn, all the doors are closing. And if there is a door that opens, it's because somebody wants to punch you in the face. And obviously, that is a Kafka moment for anyone. We can all imagine how nightmarish that would be. And so the character himself, he's not like a character. He might be a slow reactor. He's one of these people who believe that justice will be served. They got the wrong man. Nothing happened, and everybody will know tomorrow. It's going to be fine. But life doesn't work like that. So maybe if it was you and me, we would have been a little more furious about it from the beginning. But he believes that this is apparently wrong. The accusations are wrong, so everybody will know tomorrow. And then before he knows it, all the doors are slamming. And then it's too late for him to say anything. And then he starts reacting, and then he starts confronting his friend, he confronts the teacher, he confronts everyone, but it's too late, right? And that is just a Kafka world where everything you thought was your life and everything you loved is just turning their back on you. And so how was that? It was strangely, surprisingly isolated to do it, because we're there, everybody's there, these are my friends, but I had a lot of scenes by myself, and it turned out that when I met him working, everybody had left, and I would spend 3 days by myself. So it was quite isolated. So I, for free, I got that sense of being, nobody likes me. Everybody left when I came to work, right? Yeah, it was a brutal film to watch, more to watch than it was to make it. I still had my director as my friend, and the little girl, she was my friend as well.
Here's another question about preparation, and this is one I never would have thought of myself. It's interesting. Do you have a particular musical playlist you listen to prepare for roles? Does that help, listening to music as a process, or how do you get into that space?
I've done it very few times. I've done it a few times, and there's something wonderful about it. It can set a certain mood. It can set. I'm sure you can do it with all kinds of things. Very happy scene, very sad scene. I think I've noticed that people tend to do it when it's supposed to be a sad scene, and people put on their ear things and they go into themselves. Tried it a couple of times, and I really enjoy it. And you take it off, and you can stay in that mood for a certain period, but it also leaves you, right? So you have to find this. I tend to want to find it in the room, because I can't just walk around doing this all by myself all the time. I tend to try to find between my fellow actors and the atmosphere in the room. So let's say if it's a depressing scene, I would not run around having a laugh in between the scenes. I would definitely isolate myself and make sure that the tension in the room was still there. And I wouldn't like people to come in and chit chat in this room in the breaks. I would like them to do that there. I would like to have some matching in the room. So try to place it in a set. I think it's more my way of doing it.
Yeah. Among the Hannibal questions, here's one that asks that the character has been played by multiple actors over the years. Were you afraid of needing to excel in a particular way, or were you afraid of falling into the same patterns as other people who played that character? Just tell us a little bit about knowing that this character existed in the world, whether you wanted to carry over certain things or if you wanted to completely reinvent it when playing it yourself.
Yeah, of course, I was super reluctant to go that down and wear the shoes of Anthony Hopkins and Brian Cox, because they've done it to perfection in their version of it, right? So I had a meeting with Brian Fuller, and he was pitching the first two seasons, but after 2 hours he was in season 14 already. He was just so much in it. He was very convincing, and I realized right away we were doing something completely different. When we look at the Silence of the Lamb, I believe that Anthony Hopkins had 14 minutes of screen time, and he makes such great impact on us, right? In a TV show, I will have that every episode, and I can hold my horses for 12 episodes, and then I reveal who I am, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a different animal. Talking about the subtleties, when is it appropriate to use them? In this character, specifically appropriate to use the subtleties, the tiniest little smile, the tiniest little look, and then it grows and grows, and all, before you know it, the devil is out. So that when I realized that's what we were doing, and I didn't have to produce as much as they did in the films right away, but eventually, then I realized it was a different thing, and I was over the moon and very thrilled to be part of it.
Yeah, what you were saying actually about lead versus supporting performances is directly relevant to Hannibal, the way that it would be portrayed differently, say, in
Hannibal Lecter is a supporting actor in Silence of the Lamb, but in our minds, he is absolutely the lead. I mean, we remember him as the lead, right? That's also thanks to his enormous talent, Anthony Hopkins, right? Yeah. So we were not doing all of that in the first episode. We could, zip it out in 13 episodes and then a little more.
In recent years, there's been this whole kind of conceptual thing about let's take famous oppositions, good versus evil, and flip them so that we're looking at the villain as the focus, we've seen that in a lot of different properties over the years. It's the sort of wicked effect of, the Wizard of Oz from the point of view of the, Wicked Witch of the West. But it's interesting because so many films, the villain is the most interesting character. And so when this happens, and Hannibal is a great example as a TV series doing this, you can really explore the character who gets less screen time, but it seems to be the one that we always remember. You know, you think about No Country for Old Men, and the most interesting person on screen is Javier Bardem's Sugar character.
Absolutely. But I think that this happened way before cinema was invented. This happened way before that. I mean, 5 minutes after we invented God, we invented Satan. Right? That's what we did. We needed we knew that he was part of us. We knew that we couldn't ignore him, so we invented him as well. So we put them on a pedestal, and then we have the eternal war between those two. They did it in Greek mythology, in Roman mythology, in Egyptian mythology. So the other side of the coin has always been there, and we've always been very curious of what it is and how much room does it take inside of us. You know, how much space does it take? Hopefully it's a fraction, but sometimes we feel it's a little more than that. And that's why I think it's always been interesting to put that on the big screen.
You know, this coincides too, though, this, you know, trend we're talking about in the way that cinema focuses on these characters with the kind of reboot of Bond and with Casino Royale. And you play the first villain in this new cycle that really, you know, focused on realism and focused on stripping that franchise down where it had gotten so many bells and whistles and gadgets and all this stuff. And but to make that villain kind of not so much psychological, but make him sort of more a human being, not some sort of cartoon character.
Because he's not taking over the world, and he becomes fragile in a couple of situations. He's just another person that owes a lot of people a lot of money, you know.
Right.
And so that becomes, we humanize him to a degree, right? And I think that's been the key word with the new era that Bond has stepped into. Come on, we love all the bad guys from the 70s and the 60s, iconic. But time's changing, and we want to see something a little more dualistic in a character, and so it was. I don't think we could have avoided it. The time was right for it.
How much of that, because there's so much control that goes into those Bond movies. I mean, how much of what you do in that film do you feel like you were allowed to do, and how much of it was really just them dictating, this is what we need from you in this role?
Surprisingly, a lot, I would say. I mean, we didn't change the scenes. We didn't rewrite the script. We might do in smaller budget films, which is more of a cooperation. But it was a great script, so I didn't feel the urge to. I mean, we could come up with little ideas, change it here and there. We had a big torture scene between me and Daniel, and we had quite a few ideas that are in there. And Martin was listening, and it was just like working on any other film, and then this and that, and to make it even more brutal, why don't we go this way? And at a certain point, Martin said, "Hey, guys, come back. It's a Bond film." You know, we were flying out there as if it was a dogma film. But quite a lot of the ideas we had ended up in the movie, right? There's a certain limit of creation we can go, but I found surprisingly how much liberty he gave us.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think that movie's not only reinvented that franchise, but it's reinvented action, because so many movies take their cues from from the successful franchises, and the first Bourne movie, the second Bourne movie, Casino Royale. I mean, basically, it put blockbuster action cinema where it is now.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things that was super interesting. I mean, I get to play a Bond guy, and I'm an ex-gymnast, I'm an ex-dancer. I mean, I can do any stunt in the world. And the only stunt I had to do was fold 2 aces. It was just like, guys, finally I'm in a big action film. I'm doing no stunts. But watching it afterwards, because I have no idea. I could only imagine what the stunts would look like. Just seeing the start with the parkour guy and Daniel, where they're chasing each other, running, jumping. It was just amazing for 10 minutes. It blew me away. Because when you're part of such a big film, you have no idea what it looks like before you see it.
So one of our attendees is asking, how different was it to work in Kojima's Death Stranding compared with your film career? Can you talk about that process as a creator?
Well, Kojima did his very best to make the scenes real scenes. They were the big difference is that we had lines, we had interaction. The big difference was that we had a camera on a helmet and we were dressed in a tight that was green, and we had dots all over our faces. So when we had physical interaction, whether it was fight or a hawk, we would always crumble up, you know, and it would be disastrous. And we would say to Kojima, well, let's just do that again. And he would say, no, it's fine. We will post that. And
okay.
as obviously we're not used to that. If we don't hawk, you can't use it. But you can because it's a computer game, right? He wanted to capture the essence of our movements and our emotions and our voices. That's what he was after, and it was a great experience. He is a very enthusiastic man. He rarely said that didn't work. Let's put it that way. He was always just, thank you so much for doing that. Let's do another version. You know, it was really fun. I mean, and the good thing about wearing that green tie and have a camera in a helmet is that I wasn't the only one. Luckily, there were other actors. If not, you would just feel like an idiot, you know.
Right. I'm always impressed, you know, like when you look at the performance capture stuff, or you think of what Sandra Bullock had to do for Gravity. I mean, this is something where an actor has to totally reinvent the way you go about, and it may be very liberating, but it's also, you just have to rewire yourself for that type of, the way that your performance is being interpreted or captured, you know. In
many ways, that's the origin of acting. You know, this is acting. You have to imagine everything. Normally for actors, we're just reacting. We're reacting to our fellow actor saying something. Then we react, or he pushes us, we react. If there's nothing there, now you have to earn your money and act, you know.
Sure. A question comes in saying, what do you think the feminist wave and stronger female characters do with male characters? Let's see. I'm going to just reinterpret this because I'm not sure of the syntax, but in a way, you worked with Suzanne Bier at a time when in American cinema, other countries were very far behind in terms of having equal representation with women. She's of course, you know, very strong and held her own as part of Danish cinema in that group. But also there's, you know, the representation on screen, focus on male characters versus, in recent years, you look at Venice and Cannes, and many of the movies are led by strong women, and that asks a different thing of how you would play opposite when you're not the lead character, but maybe supporting. Even when they, now I'm complicating it, when they remade After the Wedding, they gender flipped the movie.
Oh, I'm so surprised they did that. Okay, I'm making a little fun of that, obviously, because the story was for a man. And you can, if you want to flip it, you can do it. You have to figure out why you want to do it. And just because you can. I mean, I grew up in a world where this was never a theme. I mean, I worked with numerous female directors and numerous male directors. And I grew up with TV shows and films where the lead was women, and sometimes it was a man. So it might be a big issue in the States, and it is in my home country. But to focus on it, I don't think that necessarily solves problems. I think it might just, you know, there's a lot of talk about quotas for this, quotas for that. And I think in the end of the day, everybody wants to do the right thing. So if you want this woman to be the lead, that's what you do. Imagine a world where the women have played X amount of leads, and then this film comes up and it's a woman lead and it's perfect for this girl, but they've done too many. So now we have to change it into a man. And everybody knows it's the wrong thing to do. Nobody would be happy with that. And flip it the other way around. Before I kind of get myself into some kind of anti-PC trouble here, I believe, I just simply believe that be careful with quotas. You know, I don't know. I mean, I know Suzanne Bier would be furious if she got a job because of a quota. She wants it because she's good at what she's doing. Mm-hmm. If there are a lot of boundaries to get there, to get that education, if there's something that in a systemic way is stopping you, that has to be addressed. But if that's not the case, and let's say there's only 30% who is applying for a directing school who are female, that might because there's only that many female who has that interest. So let it go, and maybe
it is interesting.
It will be 80%, you know. But
most American
stopping you, we should address it, right.
Most American film schools have more women attending than men, and so it is interesting that represents the crowd now that is interested in entering this field, and it suggests a difference.
I work for in Denmark; they are all female, they're all women. So apparently they had what used to be a masculine job. They had interest in going that way, right? So obviously, if something systemically is keeping gender, race, whatever down, we have to address it. If that is not the case, let people do what they find interesting, you know. And as I said, be careful with quotas. Susanne Bier would never do a film because of a quota. She would say no thanks.
Have you ever gotten to a point, I mean, because this is something that's really being looked at now, I think, in this conversation of the distance between an actor, his or her background identity, and the role they're playing. Have you had to look back at any other parts in your career and wonder, like, would I be allowed to play this part now? As you know, there's this this kind of scrutiny on some of these.
It's heartbreaking to watch what's happening. Again, not diving too deep in it. So was it Halle Berry that was all of a sudden she was a bad person now because it's a yes to a character? That was it a
transgender character? You're right. That happened
recently. Somebody who went into transition, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So either way, we say it. So that if it was originally a man who turned into a woman, should it be a man playing that character or vice versa? We're actors. I mean, how many transgender actors are there? Okay, let's say, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Is there 1,000? And out of those thousands, how many are really, really good, as good as Halle Berry? That's the only thing that counts, isn't it? So if I play somebody who's being raped, do I need to have been raped to play raped? Or do I need to play a rapist and then have been a rapist? It's opening up a lot of cans of worms, right? I understand that a lot of things are happening and people feel excluded, and for that reason they take the battle certain places. Mm-hmm. But it is in the word acting, pretend, right? If I only had to play a Danish guy who was a former gymnast and a former dancer, I wouldn't do a lot of characters.
This is as a last question, it's an opportunity to talk about just the fact that you have worked with so many international directors, and you're not playing a Danish guy every time. You're kind of reinventing. Are those intimidating offers? Are there certain things you wouldn't accept because the language barrier is too great, or the transformation has been intimidating? You seem to really be versatile, as we've said, you know, in terms of accepting these roles.
Well, the limit has always been, can you do an American accent? Can you do a Brit? Can you do whatever? To a degree, you could probably pull it off if you went all parrot, but it also takes a lot of your liberty away. You know, you don't feel that free if you're just standing there doing an accent, right? So somehow we always managed to squeeze in that this guy was from Lithuania, or he was from an exotic place, and we don't mention where, right?
Right.
So it's so good. It limits to a certain degree. I mean, you can't play an all-American cop, and so be it.
Unless you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, who somehow seems to have overcome that in his action career, where you go back to some movies and you think, Arnold Schwarzenegger, you think they just never address the fact that this character is foreign sometimes, because
he played a lot of robots, though, right? And robots, they can talk like that.
Right. It's part of the joke almost of his persona is that.
No, but that's the thing. I'm coming back to, I mean, obviously, if you have some great trans actors, obviously, they should obviously be working, right? But, I mean, but it comes down to the fact, so can they always only play trans? Or do you have some trans actors who can just play an ordinary woman or an ordinary man? It's just like, it's a strange discussion to have. I mean, if you're an actor, you would like to do different things. And I hope so, if you're a trans person and you're an actor, that you would like to do different things and not focus on only doing that, right? Yeah. So it is, It's more of a political discussion than it is a discussion about acting, because acting is acting. I mean, I'm not a king. I played a king once. I'm so sorry to all the kings out there. What can I say? You know, and but I think it's on a political level, and that's something in the undercurrent that has to be addressed, and then it comes on the surface with this kind of discussion, and I think this discussion should have been had somewhere else before it blooms up here and everybody goes screaming at each other. Nobody wants to hurt anyone. I'm sure Halle Bailey did not want to hurt anyone when she said yes to that character. I'm sure she would have loved to give life to this character in the best way possible. To flip that around and make that as if she was evil, even thinking about it, doesn't sound healthy to me.
I mean, acting is about transformations into characters. It's about opportunities for talented people to challenge themselves in these ways. And I mean, it is a very complicated subject, and I didn't mean to sort of steer you into touchy territory, but I mean, like.
No, but you know how it works. I mean, even a little. I don't know how many are listening now. Even a small little, whether we're 100 or 1,000, Twitter warriors will always go, and they go, look what they're talking about. See what he said. And it's everything is out of proportion. Everybody has respect for everyone. But sometimes things are getting blown out of proportion. And the real dialogue is never had. It's always the wrong dialogue.
Yeah. Well, Mads, I really appreciate your spending an hour with us, answering questions that came in from our viewers as well. And it's been a real delight to sort of...
On that note, we end with that controversy.
I think we're out of time, but I mean, you've really given us kind of a tour through your career and through your experience. We really appreciate that. So thank you for joining us. And I can't wait till, your movie is shared with the world, another round, so people can see you in that. Thanks.
Yeah, I can't wait either. And it's been a great honor to be here in Sarajevo, even though I'm not there.
I know they're counting on you to come next year as soon as it's possible. So I hope you can do that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.
All right, bye.